The smell hits you first. Imagine stepping into a closed space where 20, 30, sometimes 50 other people sleep in close proximity. Unwashed bodies, sweat soaked into straw that has never been properly dried, human waste from the shared latrine, the peculiar, sour smell of desperation. And underneath it all, damp, always damp. The dampness that never fully leaves because the ventilation is poor and the moisture has nowhere to escape. The temperature shifts with the seasons. In summer, the slave quarters become an oven. The heat trapped inside stone walls, radiating back from the earth floor, making it nearly impossible to rest. You lie on your thin mat, and sweat pools beneath you. The straw becomes soggy. Insects multiply. In winter, the cold penetrates everything. Your mat offers almost no insulation. You huddle close to other slaves for warmth, but there is barely enough space to move. The cold seeps into your bones. Your breath becomes visible in the darkness. Now imagine the sounds: snoring, coughing, the scratch of rats in the walls. Sometimes the sound of someone crying quietly, trying not to disturb others. Sometimes the sound of sickness, a slave with fever talking in fragments, or another suffering from dysentery. And the shared latrine becomes a nightmare of necessity. You hear chains if your master is particularly paranoid, and many are. The clink of iron as someone shifts position. The muffled arguments between slaves who have grown irritable from exhaustion. Your bed is typically one of the following: a thin mat made of rushes or straw, placed directly on the ground. Perhaps, if you are fortunate, a wooden pallet. Some very poor slaves sleep on bare earth. Those mats are your only barrier between your body and the cold, hard ground. They offer minimal comfort. They sag under your weight. The straw becomes compressed over time, losing its cushioning. You wake with your hips and shoulders aching from the pressure of lying on something so thin. In the richer households, a few slaves might have actual beds, simple wooden frames with rope woven across to support a mattress. But even these are sparse and poorly made. There are no blankets, or perhaps one thin covering that you must share. Your master provides barely enough. And here is a detail that modern people often overlook. There is no privacy. None. You sleep in a room with dozens of other people. You change clothes in front of them. If you are ill, they see it. If you are injured, they see it. If you are desperate or grieving, there is nowhere to hide your emotion. Privacy is a luxury that only the free and wealthy experience. The light in the slave quarters comes from a single oil lamp, if anything at all. More often, it is complete darkness once the sun sets. You navigate by feel. You find your mat in the blackness. You lie down and wait for whatever the night brings. Contrast this with the world just beyond these walls. Your master, the man who owns you, sleeps in a bedroom that is carefully designed for comfort. His bedroom is part of the private quarters of the villa. It is heated in winter by hypocaust, a system of pipes beneath the floor that circulates warm air. It is cool in summer because the thick walls and high ceilings are designed to retain a moderate temperature. His bed is a wooden frame with a real mattress, stuffed with wool or other materials. His sleeping space is private. Servants tend to his comfort. His wife sleeps beside him. His children are nearby. He can sleep through the night, undisturbed. You will not have that privilege. This contrast between the comfort of the master and the degradation of the slave quarters was not incidental to Roman slavery. It was essential. The master's comfort required your discomfort. His rest required your sleeplessness. The system was designed so that one person's leisure was built on another person's exhaustion. Understanding this helps us understand not just the conditions of slavery, but the mentality that supported it. You are not sleeping through the night. This is what you must understand from the beginning. The idea that slaves simply rested during the hours of darkness is a misunderstanding that has persisted for centuries. The night in a wealthy Roman household is a busy time. Not busy in the way that modern people understand busyness, not with smartphones and emails and rushing from one appointment to another. Instead, the night busyness of Roman slavery was a constant, low-level state of alertness and activity. You might be called upon at any moment. Consider the structure of a typical night in a wealthy villa. After sunset, which in summer might be around 9 o'clock in the evening, and in winter around 5 o'clock, the household shifts into its evening routines. Your master, if he is a man of status, might host a dinner party. These are not casual affairs. They are elaborate events that can last for hours. A Roman banquet is a complex production, and a slave household is the machinery that makes it run. You might be one of the slaves designated to serve at this banquet. If so, your sleep has not yet begun. Instead, you are dressed in whatever clothing your master has assigned to you, often very little, because male slaves serving in the dining room are frequently kept partially or completely naked, or dressed only in loincloths. This is both a practical choice, since nudity was common in Roman culture, and a psychological one. Nudity emphasized the slave's status as property, as something less than fully human. You stand in the triclinium, the dining room, as guests recline on couches, eating course after course. You pour wine. You serve food. You watch for any signal from your master that indicates he needs something. You must be silent. You must be invisible. You must move smoothly and efficiently, never making a sound unless spoken to. Your bare feet are cold on the stone or tile floor. your attention is divided into 1,000 small tasks. The smell of the food mixes with perfumes and incense. You hear the guests talking, laughing, sometimes arguing about politics or philosophy. You hear your master's voice above the others, trying to impress, trying to show his status through the quality of his dinner and the obedience of his slaves. The banquet might last until 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning, sometimes later. You do not know how long it will be. You do not have the luxury of anticipating when you will be finished. You simply wait and serve and wait some more. What are you thinking during these hours? Are you thinking about when you will finally be allowed to rest? Are you thinking about the pain in your feet from standing so long? Are you thinking about whether your master is pleased or angry? Are you thinking about whether you will be punished later for some small mistake you might have made? Historians cannot tell us what slaves thought in these moments, but we can make educated guesses based on what we know about the human mind under stress. Exhaustion would be present. Anxiety would be present. Boredom mixed with tension would be present. The knowledge that a single mistake could result in punishment would hang over everything. What exactly does it mean to serve at a Roman banquet through the night? The answer is far more complex than simply carrying food and wine. A banquet is a theater, and you are both stage crew and background actor. Every element has been planned. Every detail matters. The food arrives from the kitchen, another part of the villa, where other slaves have been working equally hard, preparing elaborate dishes. You receive the food, typically on large platters or in bowls. You must know which guest receives which dish first, in what order, following the complex social hierarchy that your master has decided upon. Important guests eat first and better. Less important guests eat after. Clients and poorer relatives eat whatever is left. You must navigate this hierarchy without making a mistake. Picture the scene more vividly. You stand behind the couches where the guests recline. The triclinium is lit by oil lamps hanging from the walls or ceiling. The light flickers, creating dancing shadows on the frescoed walls. Walls painted with scenes of gods or gardens or dramatic moments from mythology. The room smells intensely of food and people. The heat from so many bodies gathered in one space, combined with the heat from the lamps, makes the room warm and somewhat stuffy. The guests are dressed in their finest togas, white cloth draped in intricate folds, held in place by brooches. Some wear wreaths around their heads, made of flowers or leaves. Some wear jewelry, rings, bracelets, torques. The women are draped in elaborate stolas, long dresses that required slaves hours to arrange properly. They recline on cushioned couches alongside or opposite the men. This is an unusual privilege for Roman women, being allowed to recline at dinner, but it was common among the wealthy by the 2nd century. The wine tastes sour to you, not that you would ever drink it. Wine in Rome is typically mixed with water. Drinking unmixed wine is considered barbaric. Your master carefully controls the ratio, showing off his sophistication. Some masters are generous with water, making the wine weak. Others are more stingy, making it stronger to impress their guests. You pour the wine carefully, always from the right side of each guest, always into their cup with a smooth motion that suggests you have done this 1,000 times. And perhaps you have. One mistake, a spill on someone's toga, a splash that reaches their face, and you could face punishment later. Your master cares deeply about how his slaves perform in front of guests. Each slave's action reflects on him. The conversation flows around you. Politics, philosophy, complaints about the state of the empire, gossip about other wealthy families, jokes that make the guests laugh. You hear it all, but you are not supposed to listen. You are supposed to be present and invisible simultaneously. A paradox that is central to the experience of being a slave in a household like this. Hours pass. Your feet ache. You have been standing in one position for so long that your muscles begin to cramp. Your hands, which must remain steady, are beginning to shake slightly from fatigue. The hunger in your stomach is present but distant. You will eat only after the guests have finished, and often what remains is poor quality food, leftovers, scraps. The thirst is worse. You watch people drink wine and water all around you, but you have had nothing to drink in hours. Your mind begins to drift slightly. You catch yourself. You cannot let your attention waver. One moment of inattention, and a guest signals for more wine, and you do not notice, and later your master learns about it, and you are beaten. Or a platter is dropped because your grip loosened for just a moment. Or you accidentally bump into someone, violating the space that free people expect to maintain around themselves. Finally, and it might be 1 in the morning, or 2, or later, the banquet ends. The guests depart, or perhaps they remain for further entertainment, music, dancing, perhaps the performance of actors or acrobats, which other slaves must coordinate. Eventually, the evening concludes. You are dismissed to clean up. You carry away the remnants of the meal. You scrub the dishes. You clean the floor. You return cups to the kitchen. You help restore order to the triclinium. Only now, perhaps as dawn approaches, or just after it, are you finally allowed to return to the slave quarters and attempt to sleep for a few hours before the work of the day begins. What strikes us about this experience is not just the physical exhaustion, though that is real. What strikes us is the psychological toll, the constant alertness, the knowledge that a mistake could bring punishment, the awareness that you are valued only as a tool for your master's status. The work of serving at a banquet is not intrinsically harder than many other forms of labor. But the context, the knowledge that you are property, that you have no right to complain, that your discomfort means nothing, transforms it into something more difficult to bear. What sort of bonds form in the darkness between bodies huddled close for warmth? In the night, as exhaustion presses down on you, social boundaries between fellow slaves blur and reform. You are all unequal in the eyes of the household. Even so, hierarchies persist. Higher status slaves, overseers, senior household staff, sleep closer to the door, sometimes on slightly better mats, sometimes with a spare cloak for warmth. New arrivals and children end up in the coldest corners, last to receive what little comfort can be divided. You sense the presence of dozens of men and women, some from distant provinces. A Greek scribe muttering in his language, a Gaul with a gruff laugh, an Egyptian girl whose hair smells faintly of perfumed oils, now faded. Occasionally, a voice whispers a prayer to native gods. The air is thick with difference, and yet shared hardship bonds slaves more deeply than birth or language. Rumors move more quickly here than any Roman messenger. Today's gossip: a favored kitchen slave may soon be freed. Perhaps it is simply hope, passed around like a crumb. You try to trust only a few, keeping your plans and dreams hidden. In the world of night, speaking openly is dangerous. The wrong word, heard by the wrong person, can mean punishment. Sometimes you hear the overseer's footsteps in the corridor. Sometimes it is the master's son, sneaking drunken from a party. Both can mean trouble. Eyes stay half open. Your body's tired, but your mind is always wary. You want to believe that friendship survives here. Maybe it does. You share stories, scraps of food, moments of dark humor. If this is what passes for bread, I would trade it for a stone with fewer weevils. Someone giggles, then coughs, then silence. Are these relationships real, or just another requirement for survival? Does sharing misery make it lighter, or only remind you how deep it runs? Have you ever thought about what happens if you fall seriously ill? Does the night grow longer, or does it simply become a different kind of ordeal? The slave quarters are a breeding ground for disease. All day you breathe in smoke from the kitchen, dust from the roads, the sour stench from the latrine. Breathless coughing echoes at night, and each cough is a warning. The damp earth beneath your mat seeps into your bones, cold and relentless. Some say chills invite the spirits of disease. Some nights, an old woman near the back starts to moan. A fever grips her, murmured prayers in an accent you barely understand. Someone offers her water, but not too much. Water is precious, and it must last the night. A child wheezes in his sleep, and his mother draws him close, holding him as if she could keep out death with just her arms. You do not see doctors unless a master is feeling extraordinarily merciful. Instead, the sick are sometimes given herbs or a cup of lukewarm wine mixed with honey. Roman medicine, more hope than science. Most often, the cure is to endure. If you cannot work, you are replaced. If you die, you are mourned by few, replaced by another nameless body from the market. Danger is not illness, there is violence. Arguments flare into slaps or worse. An overseer, sleep-deprived or drunk, might punish a slave for whispering too loudly. Sometimes violence comes from above. The master's angry shouts at midnight, a thrown cup, a beating for a supposed theft. You learn to make yourself small, invisible in the darkness. Rats scurry over your feet. Sometimes you hear the bark of a guard dog. Were slaves safer because of the heavy doors and walls? Perhaps. Or perhaps danger simply came from inside. But you live through it. You survive. There is a hard humor here. If we can live through the mange, we are proof against anything. The joke is funny only because the alternative is to cry, and crying is a luxury for another world. How does it shape you, this nighttime of fear and danger? Does it make you harder? Or does some piece of yourself remain gentle, waiting for a sun that never rises? Night after night, you learn to carry dread alongside exhaustion. You adapt because you must. Each night survived is its own quiet victory, even if no one sees it. What happens in your mind when night after night you are denied rest and comfort? Do dreams offer any escape, or only torment? Lying on your mat, staring at blackness so thick you can feel it press against your eyes, your mind drifts. There is no silence, only layers of noise, the rasp of a neighbor's breath, the skitter of a mouse across your ankle, the endless drip of water somewhere in the corridor. In the rare moments when you are allowed true sleep, not broken by shouts or pain or cold, you dream, but the dreams are mixed. Sometimes you remember home, the hills of your childhood, the faces of family long lost. Sometimes Rome invades your dreams, and you find yourself back in the kitchen. The triclinium, the feel is always working, even in sleep. A trick of the mind, or perhaps a cruel joke. You feel moments of hope, sometimes for freedom, sometimes simply for one night, without being woken. You wonder what you would do if you could choose. Some slaves whisper legends of others who ran away, or who were freed, or who were clever enough to buy their freedom. Each story is a string of hope in the darkness, easy to lose, desperately clutched. And yet, sometimes you find peace. A cool draft on a sweltering night, or a shared laugh at a master's ridiculous new haircut. Even in Rome there are stars, though from the slave quarters you see only hints of their light. You learn to survive on little joys, snatches of contentment, small enough to fit in the palm of your hand. The mind of a slave is a landscape of contradictions. You must accept your bondage as inevitable, yet you must never truly believe in it. You must function within the system of slavery, yet You must retain enough sense of yourself to know that the system is unjust. This creates a kind of psychological splitting, a part of you that obeys and a part of you that rebels, never entirely integrated, never entirely at peace. Some slaves find solace in religion. Whether it is the old gods they remembered from before slavery, or the emerging religions like Christianity that promise equality in the afterlife, faith offers a way to transcend the immediate reality. You might whisper a prayer to a God who knows your name, even though your master has given you a number. You might believe that after this life, there is justice, there is peace, there is a world where slaves are free. Others find solace in smaller things. The memory of a particular meal you ate as a child, a song learned from another slave, the feeling of sun on your skin during a rare break. These memories are kept polished and precious, brought out in the darkness like secret treasures. They do not change your circumstances, but they affirm that you existed before slavery, that there was more to you than this. Do the masters know what you endure? Does it matter? In the long nights, your mind adapts, not to erase the pain, but to transform it. The psyche of a Roman slave was shaped by endurance, humor, small rebellions, and the persistent, stubborn belief that something better might come. The psychological resilience required to survive this was extraordinary, a kind of strength that we, with our freedoms and securities, might struggle to comprehend. You might expect that slaves had no culture, no rituals of their own. This assumption would be wrong. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the house is most silent, something surprising occurs. Slaves gather in corners, in whispered conversations. A man recalls a song from his homeland, perhaps Egypt, perhaps Spain, and hums it so quietly that only those nearest can hear. A woman traces symbols in the dust on the floor, calling to gods her people worshipped before Rome. Someone produces a small, carved figurine hidden from the master's eyes and holds it like a prayer. These are acts of spiritual resistance. They matter because they assert identity, because they say, I am more than what my master believes I am. Some slaves practice forbidden religions. In the early 2nd century, Christianity is beginning to spread, and some enslaved people find in it a message of hope, that all souls are equal before God, even slaves. Other slaves maintain worship of their native gods, or of syncretic gods that blend Roman and foreign traditions. These practices are dangerous. Discovery could mean punishment, and yet they persist, quietly, defiantly in the darkness. There is also practical knowledge passed down. An older slave teaches a younger one which herbs reduce fever, though the knowledge is frail and often mixed with superstition. Someone knows how to read the stars. Someone else remembers songs and stories from childhood. In the slave quarters, these currencies became more valuable than coins. The unexpected truth: slavery did not erase culture. Instead, it drove culture underground, made it secret, made it precious. The night, far from being merely a time of degradation and exhaustion, was also a time of cultural preservation and resistance. In the darkness, enslaved people maintained their humanity in ways their masters would never see or understand. How did the Roman slave's night compare to slavery in other times and places? Consider first the Greek world that preceded Rome. In ancient Athens, during its golden age, slavery was widespread, but often less systematized. A Greek slave might work in a household similar to a Roman one, but the scale was typically smaller. Athens was a city-state, not an empire. The night work in an Athenian household would have been similar, serving at symposia, standing watch, maintaining the home. But the context was different. Perhaps the work was slightly less formalized, the hierarchy slightly less rigid. But as Rome expanded and became an empire, slavery became industrialized in a new way. The sheer scale changed everything. Rome needed thousands upon thousands of slaves to maintain its cities, its infrastructure, its household systems. The night was organized, systematized, turned into a machine. What had been irregular in smaller societies became routine in Rome. Compared to slavery in medieval Europe, the Roman system differed fundamentally. Medieval serfs were bound to land, not owned as property. A serf had certain rights: the right to marry, to own property in limited ways, to pass status to children. A Roman slave had none of these. The slave was chattel, pure and simple. So the night for a Roman slave was perhaps darker than the night for a medieval serf. More completely without hope. And compared to the slavery that would emerge in the Caribbean and Americas centuries later, the Roman night was different again. Smaller in scale, though no less brutal. The Roman slave worked in households primarily, not on massive plantations. The night tasks were different: serving at dinner, not harvesting crops by moonlight. But the fundamental violence, the theft of autonomy, the reduction of a human to property, was the same. What is remarkable is how consistent slavery is across time and place. The specific details change, but the essential reality remains. Humans are treated as objects. Their nights, as well as their days, are dictated by others. Their exhaustion is someone else's convenience. In fact, you might say that comparison reveals something important about human nature and social systems. Wherever and whenever slavery has existed, it has created similar patterns. Masters fear rebellion and impose surveillance and control. Slaves develop mechanisms of resistance and resilience. The night becomes a liminal space, neither fully controlled nor fully free, but something in between. So when we ask what a Roman slave did at night, we are really asking, what does it mean to be owned? What does it mean to have no right to rest, to comfort, to peace? These questions echo across millennia, making the Roman night not ancient history, but a persistent mirror held up to human cruelty and human resilience. What were the most common night tasks for slaves? The primary ones included the following: serving at banquets and evening gatherings, standing watch as a night guard, maintaining household fires through the night, cleaning and preparing rooms for the next day, accompanying the master on night travels or social visits, serving as a reader or entertainer if the master could not sleep, accompanying women of the household on nighttime visits, working in the kitchen to prepare foods that required long cooking times, carrying water, and performing various maintenance tasks. And for some slaves, particularly those in urban settings, engaging in nighttime labor on various projects or assignments. Let me examine one of these in depth. Standing watch as a night guard. Imagine you are assigned to guard duty. The master fears thieves, or perhaps he fears slave rebellion, which is a constant anxiety among Roman masters. You are given a place to stand, perhaps near the main entrance, perhaps in a corridor. You are given a lamp, though not much oil to light it. Your task is simple. Stay awake, stay alert, prevent anyone from entering or leaving without permission. Hours stretch endlessly. The oil lamp flickers, casting dancing shadows on the walls. You cannot sit. Sitting suggests inattention. You must stand, your legs aching, your mind fighting sleep with every fiber of your being. Around midnight, exhaustion becomes almost overwhelming. Your eyelids grow heavy. Your vision blurs. You pinch yourself, slap your face gently, anything to stay conscious. If you fall asleep and something goes wrong, a theft, a fire, an escape attempt, the consequences could be severe. Whipping is common. Some masters might sell you to work in the mines, which is essentially a death sentence. The mines kill most slaves within a few years. So you force yourself to remain alert, riding the knife's edge between consciousness and unconsciousness. Sometimes nothing happens. Hours pass with no incident. The repetition itself becomes torture, the sameness, the waiting, the knowledge that hours still remain before dawn brings relief. Other times, small incidents break the monotony. A guest arrives late from another house, or a servant needs to fetch water from the well, or a cat fights with a rat, and you must investigate to ensure it is not an intruder. The psychological toll of this work is significant. You must remain hypervigilant, alert to danger, yet there is no danger most nights. Your mind and body must be simultaneously relaxed enough to not jump at shadows, yet tense enough to react immediately to genuine threats. This is exhausting in a way that simple physical labor is not. Your nervous system becomes worn down. Some guards develop a kind of paranoia, seeing threats everywhere, unable to trust their own judgment about what is dangerous and what is benign. By dawn, you are barely functional, yet you cannot rest. The day's work begins immediately. You serve breakfast, clean the kitchen, perform whatever tasks are assigned. Exhaustion has become your permanent state. You simply endure, day after day, night after night, until your body simply wears out. Not all Roman slaves experienced the night identically. There existed a small elite among enslaved people, the urban, educated, favored slaves. These might be secretaries, accountants, skilled artisans, or children of the master. Some of these slaves received better sleeping arrangements, perhaps their own small room. Some were educated and taught reading and writing. Some were entrusted with significant responsibilities and given slightly more autonomy. A slave who was a skilled cook might work late into the night preparing elaborate meals, but might also receive better food than field slaves, a warmer place to sleep, and the knowledge that their skills were valued. A slave who was a scribe might work by lamplight into the evening, but have his own small chamber, away from the common slave quarters. And then there were the slaves who lived in the master's household, but were treated with a kind of quasi-familial regard. Sometimes the children of previous slaves, sometimes particularly fortunate individuals. These might eat the family's leftovers, be given small gifts, and treated with something approaching affection, though always within the boundaries of property ownership. The unexpected truth, within the system of slavery itself, hierarchies of privilege existed. Some slaves were far less miserable than others. This did not make slavery acceptable. It only created a complex world where some enslaved people had marginally better chances than others. These privileged slaves sometimes cooperated with their masters in controlling other slaves, creating fractures within the enslaved community that made collective resistance more difficult. What were the real nightmares that haunted the slaves' darkness? The most obvious fear was punishment. You knew that mistakes could bring the whip. You knew that a master's anger could be unpredictable and violent. But beyond this general dread, there were specific terrors that kept you awake, even when exhaustion screamed for rest. One fear: being sold. Your master might face financial difficulties and decide to sell slaves to raise money. Or he might simply grow tired of you, decide you were not valuable enough to keep. Being sold meant being taken from any connections you had formed, from any small familiarity you had developed, thrust into the chaos of the slave market, and purchased by an unknown master. You might end up in the mines. You might end up on a farm far from the city. You might end up in the household of someone far worse. This fear was not theoretical. It was real. Slave markets existed. Auctions occurred regularly. Other slaves you had lived with had been sold. You knew it could happen to you at any moment. Another fear: sexual violence. Female slaves in Roman households were sexually available to the master, and often to his male guests and sons. This was not considered a violation. It was considered the master's right. For a female slave, the knight could bring this threat. For male slaves, particularly young ones, similar dangers existed. The darkness and isolation of the night made these violations possible in ways daylight might not permit. The law offered no protection. The culture provided no shame for perpetrators. A third fear: separation from family. If you had a partner among the enslaved, and some slaves did form lasting bonds, or if you had children, they could be sold separately. Families were broken up routinely. Children were sometimes taken to be trained for specific purposes. At night, you might hold a child close and know that this might not last. That separation could come at any moment. And perhaps, deepest of all, the fear that nothing would ever change, that you would spend your entire life in this state, that there was no escape, no release, no hope, that death, when it came, was the only freedom you would ever know. This existential dread, the knowledge that you were trapped not just for a year or a decade, but potentially for your entire existence, was perhaps the most psychologically damaging fear of all. These fears were rational. They were based on real possibilities in the Roman world. They were the shadow that made the night darker than mere absence of light could explain. A slave lived in a state of perpetual vulnerability, and the night, when surveillance was less complete, when the master might summon you for any reason, amplified these vulnerabilities. What made Roman slavery so effective as a system of control was not just the physical coercion, though that was present. It was the systematic creation of fear. Fear that entered the night, that sat with you on your thin mat, that never truly left, even in sleep. This fear was not accidental. It was a necessary component of the system. Masters understood, perhaps not consciously but intuitively, that an enslaved person kept in constant dread would be more compliant, less likely to rebel, more willing to accept their degradation. The night was not the same for all slaves. Region mattered. Status mattered. The master's wealth and temperament mattered enormously. Consider the slave in a wealthy urban household, perhaps in Rome itself, or in Alexandria, or in Antioch. This slave lived surrounded by luxury, serving at elaborate dinners, exposed to philosophy and culture, sometimes educated. The night in such a household involved elaborate tasks, but also exposure to the wider world of Roman civilization. There was a kind of cultural richness here. Even in slavery, you might overhear philosophical discussions. You might learn the language of the educated classes. You might develop skills that could eventually lead to freedom, if you were fortunate enough. Now consider the slave on a rural estate, a latifundium, one of the massive agricultural properties that Rome depended upon. The night here was different. Agricultural slaves were organized into gangs. They slept in barracks, often in chains. The work was brutal, plowing fields, harvesting crops, maintaining irrigation systems. The nights were not spent serving at banquets. They were spent recovering from agricultural labor, enduring overcrowded sleeping conditions, living under constant watch. The rural slave's night was perhaps darker in a different sense. There was less culture, less exposure to learning, less possibility of advancement, but there was also less surveillance of the intimate details of life. A rural slave might have more freedom to worship according to his own beliefs, more space to develop relationships, more possibility of invisibility. What about the slave in the mines? The night for a mining slave might have meant being locked in an underground chamber, emerging only during day hours to work in the shafts. The night became an extension of the mine itself. Perpetual darkness, perpetual danger, perpetual exhaustion. Most mining slaves did not survive long. The conditions were lethal. The night in the mines was a prelude to death. There were also slaves in specialized roles: the gladiator, the actor, the prostitute. Their nights were structured by their specific function. A gladiator might spend the night resting before a fight or recovering from wounds. An actor might perform at night before wealthy audiences. A slave in a brothel had perhaps the most harrowing night of all, working until dawn, enduring the desires of strangers, living in conditions of disease and degradation that made ordinary slavery seem almost merciful. So when we ask what the Roman slave did at night, we must ask, which slave? The answer depends entirely on where and how the slave was enslaved, what skills or beauty or misfortune had shaped their value in the market. The night's texture was vastly different depending on these circumstances. Yet, the fundamental reality remained constant. The night belonged not to the slave, but to the master. Did the night offer any possibility of freedom, even temporary? In theory, no. A slave was enslaved day and night. The master's rights extended across all hours. There was no legal mechanism for a slave to claim time as their own. The law was clear. Your body belonged to your master. Your time belonged to your master. Your will was subordinate to your master's will. And yet, in practice, the night sometimes permitted small liberties. Consider the slave who worked in the city during the day and was allowed, occasionally, to seek other employment at night. This was uncommon, but not unknown. A slave with a valuable skill, perhaps a metal worker or a stone carver, might be allowed by a generous or practical master to hire himself out at night, provided he returned the money to the master. In these rare cases, a few hours of night belonged almost to the slave himself. You could imagine using this time to plan for freedom, to save money toward purchasing your liberty, or simply to exercise some small measure of autonomy. Or consider the slave who lived in a household where the master was negligent, or drunk, or simply not paying attention. In such a house, the night might become more porous. A slave might slip away for a brief time, might visit a lover in another household, might spend a few hours with family members they had not seen in weeks. These absences were risky. Discovery could bring harsh punishment, but they happened. More commonly, the night offered a kind of psychological freedom. When the master and family slept, when the household was quiet, a slave might allow their mind to wander, might sing softly to themselves, might tell stories that affirmed their humanity, their former life, their hopes. The night could not make someone free, but it could offer moments of autonomy within the mind. There was also a kind of freedom that came with invisibility. In the darkness, a slave might move through the house without being observed, might overhear conversations, might gather information. This knowledge could be used for survival, for understanding the household's politics, for finding ways to avoid punishment. The night's darkness was also a kind of invisibility cloak. And then there were the slaves who used the night to plan escape. Some gathered resources, extra food, a spare cloak, a bit of money. Others waited for an opportunity, perhaps a master leaving on a journey, or a new guard rotation that created a temporary gap in surveillance. Some formed networks with other slaves or with free people sympathetic to their plight. Escape was dangerous, and the success rate was low. Most runaways were caught and brought back, often brutalized, but it happened. The night was when these plans were formed, when hope could briefly overcome fear. The night did not make a slave free. The legal reality was absolute. Slavery was total, unremitting, without exception. And yet, within that totalizing system, small cracks appeared. In darkness, in moments of inattention, in the spaces between surveillance, a kind of limited freedom sometimes emerged. Not freedom in any meaningful sense, but freedom adjacent. Brief moments where something resembling autonomy flickered to life before being extinguished again. Your body is not designed to survive without sleep. Yet, this is precisely what Roman slavery demanded. A healthy adult needs approximately 6 to 8 hours of consolidated sleep. This is not a luxury. It is a biological necessity. Without it, the immune system weakens, cognitive function deteriorates, emotional regulation becomes difficult, and susceptibility to illness increases dramatically. A Roman slave serving at night banquets, standing guard, maintaining the house, might receive only 2 to 4 hours of fragmented sleep, and often not even that. Over weeks and months and years, this accumulates into a kind of permanent exhaustion, not the temporary tiredness you might experience after a late night, but a chronic, debilitating exhaustion that becomes the baseline of existence. What happens to the human body and mind under such conditions. Accidents increase, mistakes multiply, the immune system fails. Illnesses that would be minor for a rested person become serious. The body simply wears down, and many slaves did not survive into old age. The average life expectancy for a slave was significantly lower than for free Romans, and chronic sleep deprivation was part of the reason why. There was also a psychological dimension. Chronic sleep deprivation affects mood, increases anxiety, and impairs judgment. A sleep-deprived slave was more compliant, less likely to rebel, less capable of sustained thought or planning. Sleep deprivation was thus not only a consequence of slavery, it was a tool of control. Whether intentionally or not, the system of slavery used exhaustion as a form of domination. The unexpected truth, the very fact of being denied adequate sleep, was a form of violence, as real and damaging as physical beating. It was slower, more insidious, but ultimately just as destructive. How did the Romans light the night? The primary light sources in a Roman home were the following: oil lamps, small clay or bronze vessels containing oil with a wick. These provided dim, flickering light. Candles, made from tallow, animal fat, or sometimes beeswax, expensive and used primarily by wealthy households. Torches, wooden sticks dipped in pitch or resin, used for moving through corridors. Braziers, fire bowls containing burning charcoal or wood, used for warmth and light in larger rooms. Let me examine the oil lamp in depth, as it was the most common. An oil lamp illuminates an area of perhaps a few feet. The light is warm and orange-tinged, but insufficient to truly banish darkness. Shadows dance on walls. Beyond the immediate circle of light, darkness remains absolute. If you are carrying a lamp through a corridor, you can see only what is directly ahead and to the sides. Behind you, darkness closes in immediately. As a slave, you might carry a lamp for your master as he walks through the house at night. Part of your assigned role. The lamp is heavy in your hand. The oil is precious and expensive. You must keep it steady to prevent splashing. You must ensure the light remains bright enough to illuminate the master's path. If the light dims, if you stumble and the lamp wavers, it reflects poorly on you. The light from lamps and torches created a strange geography of night. The house was not uniformly dark. Instead, it was a patchwork of illuminated zones and deep shadows. You learned to navigate this landscape, to move silently from light into darkness and back. In the darkest areas, you moved by memory and touch, knowing the house's layout so well that your feet found their way without vision. The smoke from oil lamps was constant. It hung in the air, mixed with the aromas of food, bodies, and incense. Your eyes watered slightly from it. The smell became so familiar that you barely noticed it. yet it infiltrated everything. Your clothes, your hair, your skin. The smell of night in a Roman household was the smell of burning oil and the mixture of all those human bodies in close proximity. The light that these lamps provided was never quite bright enough, and it was never quite stable. The flame wavered with any draft of air. Shadows moved in ways that your tired mind might interpret as threat. The Romans lived by lamplight, and the night was never truly banished, only negotiated with, managed, kept at bay by these fragile points of flame. When does the night finally end for a slave? Is it when the sun rises, or long before? In the summer, dawn comes early, perhaps around 4 o'clock in the morning. In winter, it can be as late as 7 or 8. But the slave's night often ends before dawn arrives. As the first hints of light begin to touch the horizon, still invisible to most of the household, activity in the slave quarters intensifies. Someone must wake. Someone must rise first and kindle the fires. Someone must prepare water for washing. Someone must begin preliminary work in the kitchen. The work of the new day begins in the darkness, while the city outside is still asleep. You might be roused by an overseer's shout or by a simple routine. Your body, accustomed to the rhythm, might wake automatically. You rise from your thin mat, your joints stiff, your muscles aching. Your mouth tastes foul, or eyes are gritty from insufficient sleep. You have perhaps not slept more than a few hours, and the sleep you did have was restless, broken by sounds and cold. You perform minimal ablutions, washing your face in cold water if you are fortunate enough to be near the water supply, or simply standing and stretching if you are not. There is no time for grooming. You dress quickly in whatever clothing you wear. If you are to serve in the household, you put on the garment your master has assigned. If you work in the kitchen, you move toward the kitchen, where others are already kindling fires. The first task of dawn is often the rekindling of fires. In Roman houses, fires in braziers were banked, covered with ash, at night to preserve them through the dark hours. At dawn, someone must uncover the coals, add fresh wood, and coax the fire back to life. This was technically the fire's job, and if you were assigned to firekeeping, this was your primary responsibility. This ancient act, tending the flame, keeping it alive through the darkness, was one of the most essential tasks a slave could perform. As light increases and the household begins to stir, the pace accelerates. Breakfast must be prepared. Water must be fetched from the well. Rooms must be cleaned and aired. The family begins to wake. Their demands begin to flow. The night is over, but there's no rest. Only a transition from one kind of work to another. The day begins much as the night ends, with exhaustion, with continuation, with the relentless demand for service. A slave's life was not divided into day and night, work and rest, as a free person might be. Instead, Time was a continuous flow of labor, punctuated by insufficient sleep and the constant pressure of demands. The night did not truly end, it merely transformed. The night's darkness gave way to the day's demands, but the exhaustion remained. You carried the night's fatigue into the day, just as you carried yesterday's exhaustion into last night. The cycle was perpetual. Time was not divided into manageable units. Time was simply an endless continuity of labor and servitude, punctuated by insufficient rest and the constant awareness that your time was not your own. So what have we learned by walking through a night in the life of a Roman slave? We have learned that slavery was not simply a daytime experience. It did not end when the sun set or begin when it rose. Slavery was total. It consumed the night as completely as the day, and in many ways, the night revealed slavery's true nature more clearly than daylight could. During the day, a slave was busy, occupied with specific tasks, directed by clear instructions. The day had a structure that could almost be called routine. But the night was different. The night was when the full weight of powerlessness became apparent. The night was when the body rebelled, when fear crept in, when the psychological reality of being property became most acute. We have learned that Roman slavery was not monolithic. It varied by location, by the master's wealth, by the slave's skills, by the specific household or estate. And yet, despite these variations, certain elements remained constant: the lack of agency, the vulnerability to violence, the denial of adequate rest, the systematic dehumanization. We have learned that within a system of total domination, small acts of resistance and autonomy persisted. Slaves maintained cultural practices, formed relationships, harbored hopes, and sometimes found brief moments of freedom in the darkness. These moments did not negate slavery's reality, but they testified to the resilience of the human spirit in the face of systematic oppression. The human capacity for endurance, for finding meaning, for maintaining dignity in degrading circumstances. This is part of what the Roman slave's night reveals to us. We have also learned something about power and control. The system of slavery was not maintained through violence alone. It was maintained through the systematic control of time, of sleep, of bodily autonomy, of the right to rest. A person denied adequate sleep is a person weakened, compliance-prone, less likely to rebel. The night in Roman slavery was not simply a time of additional work. It was a tool of control. When we think of the Roman Empire today, we often think of grandeur, of the Colosseum, of aqueducts spanning continents, of military might, of philosophical and legal achievements that laid foundations for our own world. These things were real. Rome did produce lasting contributions to civilization. The law codes, the engineering, the literature, the political philosophy. These are genuine accomplishments that we still study and admire. But Rome was also built on slavery. Millions of human beings were owned, exploited, violated, exhausted. Their nights were not peaceful. Their labor was not voluntary. Their humanity was not recognized by law or by custom. And the system that enslaved them was not some aberration or mistake. It was central to how Roman society functioned. A Roman slave was not an unfortunate exception. A slave was a category of person that Roman society depended upon. This is uncomfortable to acknowledge, particularly when we admire many things about Roman civilization. We want to separate the cultural achievements from the moral failures. We want to honor the Stoic philosophers without thinking about the enslaved people who served them. We want to marvel at the Pantheon without considering the slaves who built it. But we cannot truly do this. The marble temples were built by slaves. The roads were built by slaves. The banquets that showcase Roman sophistication were served by slaves. The leisure that allowed Roman philosophers to think, to write, to debate, that leisure was purchased with the exhaustion and suffering of enslaved people. To understand Rome truly, we must understand the night of the Roman slave. We must understand what it meant to be owned, to have no rest that was truly your own, to live in constant fear and exhaustion. We must hold this reality alongside the grandeur. This is not to dismiss Rome's achievements, but to see them clearly in their full context. This is not to condemn the Romans for living in a different moral universe than ours, but rather to recognize that their slavery was structured, systematic, and depended on millions of people accepting their degradation. When we do this, when we truly grapple with this history, something shifts in how we see both the past and our own present. We begin to understand that the freedoms we take for granted, the right to sleep, to rest, to own our own time, are not inevitable features of human existence. They are the hard-won achievements of centuries of struggle. And we begin to understand that slavery and domination, while they have changed forms, have not entirely vanished from our world. The night of the Roman slave echoes in the exhaustion of workers everywhere, in the systematic denial of rest to those at the bottom of our own hierarchies, in the ways that power and privilege still depend on the labor and suffering of others. Perhaps as you lie in your own bed tonight, your comfortable bed, in your safe home, with all the time you need to sleep, take a moment to think about those who did not have this. Think about the slave in the villa, lying on thin straw, listening to others breathe around them in the darkness. Think about the weight of knowing that your body belongs to another person. Think about what it would mean to have no autonomy over your own nights, no guarantee of rest, no freedom even in sleep. This is not meant to induce guilt, but rather to cultivate what might be called historical empathy, the ability to imagine the experience of someone vastly different from ourselves, to recognize their humanity across the gulf of time, to understand that their suffering was as real as any suffering you have known. When we exercise this empathy, when we truly try to understand what a life of slavery would be like, we honor those who lived it. We say, your suffering mattered. Your humanity mattered. You were not less than human simply because Roman law said you were. History is not simply a story of progress, of constant improvement, of civilizations steadily advancing from barbarism toward enlightenment. History is also a story of cruelty, of systems of oppression, of the long shadow of suffering that shapes our world even today. When we understand the Roman night, when we truly grasp what it meant to be enslaved, we begin to understand something about ourselves, about what humans are capable of, about the fragility of freedom and dignity. And perhaps, understanding this, we are moved to build a world where all people have the freedom to rest, to be safe in darkness, to claim their own time and their own lives. Perhaps we are moved to work toward justice, not because we feel guilty about the past, but because we understand that the liberation of enslaved people is one of the great moral imperatives of any civilization. Thank you for joining me in the darkness of the Roman night. I hope this story has stayed with you, not in a way that disturbs your sleep, but in a way that deepens your understanding of history and humanity. I hope it continues to echo as we'll drift towards sleep tonight. Sleep well. You have earned it. Sleep in the knowledge that your rest is your own. Your time is your own. Your body is your own. And know that this is not something every human has ever been able to say. Sleep in gratitude for the freedoms you possess, and in hope that one day all people will be able to claim their own nights, their own rest, their own peace.